By staying until the end of this story, you're already helping women who are struggling in life. All of the revenue from this video will be donated to women in need. Please subscribe to the channel and share in the comments. Are you facing any challenges in your own life? Who knows? Maybe the next story will be yours. I never thought my life would collapse on a day designed for celebration. Stage lights glittered, white flowers lined the aisle, people laughed, clapped, raised their glasses to 20 years of brilliant success. And I, the woman who had built that empire with my husband from nothing, sat in the front row with a strange feeling, as if I were standing before the house I had built but no longer had the key to enter. When the microphone reached my hands, I smiled, tried to keep my voice steady, and said I would give 20% of my company shares to my adopted son, Danta. I thought it would be the most beautiful moment of my life, when love and trust met at a perfect point. But then he stood up, took the microphone, looked around the hall, and said in a trembling voice, "Thank you, Mom, for giving me everything. And I especially want to thank my birth mother, Ms. Maya." The entire room fell silent. She sat in the front row, an ivory dress, pale red lips, her eyes shimmering as if tears were about to fall. And I, the one who had raised him for 25 years, sat motionless, hearing something crack inside me. Behind the lights, my husband stepped onto the stage and announced that he would divorce me to marry Maya, the woman I had trusted and worked with for so many years. That night, I lost my husband, lost my son, and lost the company I had built. But in that very moment when everything collapsed, I began to find myself again. My name is Mata Rivera. I met Damon at 26, in an interview at a small company producing cereals. He wasn't movie star handsome, but his eyes knew how to listen, and his voice made people want to believe. He asked me about my views on work, and I asked him about product quality, and he answered with a smile, "If our product isn't good enough for our own children to eat, then we shouldn't sell it." I didn't know why that sentence struck me so deeply. Perhaps because I grew up poor, with meals where sometimes the only thing we could smell was smoke. When he said that, I saw a dream of a home, of a man who kept his word, who chose ethics before profit. We loved each other quietly, without drama, through late nights at work, shared cups of bitter coffee, and knowing looks across the workshop. 3 years later, we married in a small suburban wedding. I wore my mother's old dress, he wore a borrowed suit, and that night we sat in our tiny apartment and wrote plans for a future company on the back of a utilities bill. "One day we'll have our own brand," he said, and I believed him. We started from zero, a small workshop with 3 employees, an old packing machine, and a hand-carved wooden sign. I handled accounting, deliveries, customers. He handled engineering, fixing, operating. There were nights we slept at the workshop, among the noise of machines and the smell of fresh cereal. I once thought happiness was working with the person you love, even with dusty clothes and bleeding hands. Damon always said, "You're the heart, I'm the hands. Without either, nothing stands." And I believed I was the heart. Each time a shipment went out, I carefully recorded every cent, every contract, every invoice. I remember the scent of our first success, the warm sweetness of honey mixed with oats, blending with the smell of printed paper and sweat. The day our first product appeared on a supermarket shelf, I stood behind the rack, watching customers pick it up, put it down, then place it in their carts. I said nothing, only felt my eyes sting. Damon laughed, squeezed my hand. "We did it, Mata." It felt like all those hard years had been worth it. The company grew faster than we imagined. 3 years in, we rented more space. 5 years, we had our first office. 10 years, we were a corporation. People called me the deputy CFO. But in truth, I was still the woman who preferred checking stock in the warehouse to sitting behind a desk. I believed in discipline, transparency, and small values I thought would keep our family happy. But time passed, and the things that seemed most certain proved most fragile. I discovered I was infertile 6 years after we married. At first, I thought it was stress, overwork, but the test results were clear: my body could not carry a child. I walked out of the clinic with a cold piece of paper and an empty heart. That evening, Damon didn't say much. He just cooked me tomato soup and said, "It's okay, Mata, we can still be happy." I looked at him, wanting to believe, but there was a faraway streak in his eyes. In the years that followed, he traveled more. Shared dinners dwindled. Conversations grew short, more business than love. I began to feel a void not only inside me but inside our home. A 3-story house full of light but lacking warmth. Some nights I lay awake to the ticking clock, counting the seconds of a marriage slipping from my hands. One morning, while the sun was still wet with dew, Damon said he wanted to adopt. He said, "A child will make everything perfect." I didn't answer right away. I was afraid he was merely trying to fill a space he couldn't name. But I agreed. Perhaps I was too tired to refuse any chance that still had the word us. And so Danta came. A 3-year-old boy with deep brown eyes and gently curly hair. A small smile that melted my heart. When the orphanage worker placed him in my arms, he gripped my finger and looked up with wide eyes. "Mom," he said, lisping, and I knew I would die for this child if I had to. I raised Danta with everything I had: time, love, even the part of my soul I thought had cooled. He grew fast, studied well, smart and polite. I taught him how to greet elders, how to bow to the elderly, how to spend money wisely, and most importantly, how to be grateful. I still remember the first time he fell off his bike, his knee bleeding. I rushed over, but he gritted his teeth and said, "I'm okay, Mom." I saw myself in him, stubborn, tough, but also lonely. Yet sometimes in Danta's eyes I saw something strange. A depth I couldn't read, a maturity too old for a child. Each time Damon looked at him, I saw something else in Damon. Not just a father's pride but a soft, instinctive light, almost blood. I had seen that look in true fathers, and it frightened me, though I didn't know why. Time passed. The company grew larger, and Damon drifted further from me. He had private meetings, parties I wasn't invited to. Nights he came home late saying, "A client needs to sign urgently." I stopped asking much because every question built another wall. Until Maya appeared. She was hired as head of HR. About 30, long black hair, gray-blue eyes, a voice soft as velvet. Effective, tactful, able to make anyone feel heard. I liked her, for her intelligence and consideration. She often brought me coffee saying, "You should rest more. Working this much isn't good." I joked, "If I rest, who will pay your salary?" She laughed too. A beautiful laugh, a little longer than necessary. I thought nothing of it. I still believed in people, in honesty, in what I had sown. But sometimes I caught Damon and Maya in late-night meetings, the yellow light falling on their faces, closer than normal. Once, delivering documents, I heard Maya's voice, small but clear, "You should tell her, Damon. She deserves to know." I froze. I didn't know who her was. I was about to knock but stopped. In that moment, my heart pounded so hard I could hear it. I turned away, hands shaking so much I dropped the stack of papers. I told myself I must have misheard. But Damon changed. He avoided meeting my eyes, spoke only of work, and when I asked about Maya, he said, "She's competent, don't mistrust people." I was silent. Silence was the only way to hold together something cracking. One evening, I entered his office and saw a photo on the desk, Maya, Damon, and Danta taken at a company outing. The late afternoon light bathed their faces like a perfect family portrait. I stared, my heart turning cold. That night, I lay beside Damon feeling as if I were beside a stranger. I wanted to ask him many things, but no words came. In me, a premonition, a shifting of something I couldn't name. I didn't know that premonition would become reality years later, on the company anniversary, the fated day. The morning of the anniversary began with rain as fine as threads gliding across the glass, leaving long streaks like the handwriting of someone who didn't finish their assignment. I stood before the mirror fixing my hair, fastened the teardrop earrings that had accompanied me through countless meetings, a small habit reminding me that some things remain though people change. In the kitchen, the coffee machine sighed a breath of steam, then fell silent. The black coffee sent up a thin smoke like a prayer. I took a sip and felt my throat warm, my palms slightly trembling but my eyes calm. I had always believed that if I arranged my heart the way I arranged my books, everything would fall into place. The road to the convention center stretched like a taut nerve, city lights reflecting on slick asphalt. Each time the light turned red, the wipers kept time like a metronome for a song whose lyrics I hadn't learned. The grand lobby opened to bouquets of white flowers, large photographs matching 15 years of growth, from a gray workshop to night-long shipments, to glass buildings lit like boxes for dreams. I saw myself in an old frame, standing beside Damon, hair tied high, a white shirt wrinkled by a long day, The eyes in that photo were looking toward a future that did not yet have a name. Staff pinned a badge on my jacket, a golden button with 2 class barley stalks as our logo. I smiled thanks and walked on, my heels humming on the wooden floor like singing from another room. I expected many familiar faces to greet me, and I was right, light hugs, handshakes, people calling me Sister Mata, with the warmth of a large family. I heard my name on their lips and felt both near and far, as if someone were reading aloud a once familiar password that no longer opened the old door. The hall was lit by ceiling strips that cast a honey color. Rows of chairs were straight, the podium draped in black felt, the LED screen behind showed the opening slide, "Thank you for believing." I sat in the front row, 3rd seat from the left, close enough to see faces clearly, far enough not to be pulled into the eddy of gazes. Damon emerged from the wings, dark blue suit, light gray tie, hair slicked back revealing the forehead I had laid my hand on during anxious nights. His first greeting came in that steady baritone that had smothered many crises. He spoke of milestones, people, market share, then the journey from 0 to 10-digit trust. The room applauded, not loudly but even as light rain on a porch. I sat straight, hands on my knees, feeling my insides sway gently like a boat I had rowed for years. When he mentioned me, heads turned. Some eyes were warm, some curious, some measuring the changes on the face of a woman who had stood so long behind the curtains without a sound. I smiled, nodded slightly, knowing this speech was a coat of paint over the facade of a house whose foundations had been replaced. Tributes passed with flowers and framed photos, and then came the generational handover. The host invited me up. My legs wavered a little, but I climbed steadily. The microphone was cold and smooth in my hand like a stone. I thanked everyone, not long, not ornate, only words that stood straight and clear, and announced my decision today. On this anniversary, I will transfer 20% of my 30% stake to Danta. As the words left my mouth, I heard a wind in the room, not real wind, but the invisible shift of thoughts, calculations, curves of the future drawn rapidly in the listeners' heads. I added a few lines about trust and responsibility, about glory never being handed without its weight. Then I signed the document on stage, my handwriting familiar as a trodden path, the pen whispering like a leaf. I turned down, looked at the guests, searched for my son's eyes, and saw Danta rise. My son was handsome in a clean-cut way, sharp jaw, intelligent eyes, wearing a navy suit that fit well, hair slicked without fuss. He took the microphone and opened with a slightly shaky, "Thank you." I saw the little boy who once swung his legs on the kitchen chair reciting the alphabet. My breath deepened, my heart slowed to listen. I thought he would turn to me and say, "Thank you, Mom." Just those 2 words would be enough to make me smile with tears. But his next sentence veered toward the front row, toward a woman in a fitted ivory dress, sitting straight-backed, wearing not too large pearl earrings, hair in soft waves, makeup restrained as if she had long known today she would be on camera and had chosen her gentlest face. Danta said, "I want to send a special thanks to my birth mother, Ms. Maya." A blank space opened. No sound was lost, yet everything felt unplugged. I looked at Maya, our head of HR, standing to place a hand on her chest, nodding like answering a ritual long awaited. Her eyes glistened. I couldn't tell if from emotion or well-practiced optics in front of a mirror. I didn't stand, didn't gasp. I just sat, feeling my chair slip half a step back, as if the floor itself wanted to avoid a collision. Around me, whispers rose and settled like coffee foam. Some looked at me, some at Damon. Most looked at Maya because this revelation fed the crowd's old hunger for a story. In a single heartbeat, I understood why Damon had delayed so many things, why there were meetings I wasn't invited to, why internal photos sometimes drew a line of light through 3 faces: man, woman, child. Damon didn't cut in immediately. He let our son finish the thanks that sounded pre-written. "Thank you for giving me life. Thank you, Father, for always being there." Words rolling like bright marbles across the floor, the hall guided by a hand I knew well whose hand it was. Then Damon stepped forward, holding the mic as he held everything, sure and quiet. He glanced past me the way one glances at a closed door before entering another room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have one more announcement today," he said, voice calm as water. "Mata and I will divorce. Maya and I will marry." There was no explosion, only a pivot in every gaze that couldn't be ignored. I heard a teaspoon touch a cup in the far left corner. A tiny sound I would remember for years, because it was the sound of normalcy continuing in the most abnormal moment. I pressed my index fingers together, two porcelain pieces trying to fit but not flush. I didn't look at Damon. I looked at Danta, the boy I had taken for vaccinations, taught to tie his shoes, taught to read and to say sorry when he spilled milk. He stood there with a new pride stretched across his face like a drum skin. I wanted to say my son, but my throat was dry as paper. I only nodded, as I had always nodded when he decided things. The ceremony continued. Every program has a schedule. The host shifted topics. The band played a light, soulless jazz. I left my seat and stepped out. The corridor was cold. Mirrors on the wall reflected me into many small me's, passing through one another without touching. I went into the restroom, turned on the tap, let water run over my wrists. The chill cleared my head. I stared into my own eyes in the mirror and said silently, "All right." Two small words like a hitch before the staircase changes floors. When I returned, the hall had moved to the partner signing segment. Maya stood beside Damon, lips in a measured smile, neither blatant nor hidden. I saw the practiced mastery of public emotion management, a skill she must have honed with Damon for a long time. The ceremony ended in paper confetti, white scraps drifting like movie snow. I didn't take photos, didn't shake more hands. I left the building when the rain had stopped. The sky was gray but not threatening, like someone who had said what needed saying and had only silence left. On the drive home, the traffic lights seemed to change slower, or maybe I just stared longer. I opened my door to the smell of old wood and soap flowing like a stream. I hung my coat, removed my earrings, set them in my mother's porcelain dish. The house was so quiet I could hear the cars on the small back street. I sat at the kitchen chair, buried my face in my hands, and a thought flashed like a bird hitting a window and flying off. I raised their child for them. There was no exploding anger, only a fatigue, a truth so simple it was bare. I brewed a pot of tea. The old porcelain teapot hissed, the bubbling soothing me like hearing my own heartbeat. I texted Danta a single line, "When you're free, come home for a meal." The message went seen, with no reply. I didn't wait. I washed the cup, dried it, set it on the shelf, each motion a small meditation for a mind at the edge of a cliff. Night fell in dark blue. I walked through the rooms, touched chair backs, door frames, the edge of the wedding photo I would take down tomorrow or the day after. I hadn't decided. I didn't want to do anything in haste. Haste is accomplice to mistakes. I lay down. The ceiling's shadow was a thin blanket between me and the sky. I closed my eyes and a slideshow of life appeared. Damon with tomato soup, Danta holding an alphabet board, Maya smiling, me smiling, all four of us in a frame never taken, then a blank screen. The next morning I rose earlier than usual, took a pencil and a notebook, drew small boxes like a checklist, wrote headings: budget, vendors, long-term contracts, approval process. I no longer had an executive seat, but skills don't leave the one who learned them with a life. I needed to understand why in the past year reports bore scratches: falling revenue, rising expenses, leaders talking of investing in the future, yet investments shouldn't become nameless shadows. I called an independent auditing firm with no ties to anyone in the company. The woman's voice on the line was clear and crisp. She asked what I needed. I said, "The footprints of money." She chuckled softly. "We're good at tracking footprints." We arranged to meet that afternoon. Then I opened my computer and dug into files I still had rights to. HR approvals were a lush green forest never pruned. Maya's name on many branches, not always wrong but strangely thick. New vendors signed for capacity building. Soft terms, blurry effectiveness assessments. I opened social media. A habit I rarely kept, but that morning I logged in like someone learning to read. I saw a photo of a yacht deck, oiled teak, a glass of wine and a label I knew was expensive. Caption: sunny day. The account belonged to Maya's friend. Reflected in the glass were two people, a man in a cap and a woman with tied hair. Enough angle to recognize their silhouettes. I didn't save the image. I wanted the process to be proper. I called an old delivery driver I trusted. He hesitated, then confessed, "They tell us now to take stock first and do the paperwork later. One time the goods were expired and they told us to swap labels." It was like hearing about a kitchen where good food is sprayed with perfume to mask the rot. I took notes, recorded audio. I didn't cry. I worked. In the afternoon, the auditor arrived. A short-haired woman with eyes like blades but a gentle voice. She listened to my summary, opened her laptop, fingers flying so fast I couldn't see the keys. Money follows habits, habits follow power, she said, and sat with me to frame questions. Good questions are paper clips that keep piles of invoices from sliding. At night, I ate a simple bowl of noodles, the broth a little salty, and reminded myself that the body is the first territory to hold. 2 days later, I received a preliminary report, a chain of contracts with shell companies as thin as onion skin, consulting implementation, leadership training, culture optimization. Money flowed steadily, transfers near reporting cycles, no outputs, gift boxes with nothing inside. In contact lists, Maya's personal email appeared on a few lines, enough to smell smoke, not yet to call it fire. I called Danta and suggested a cafe where we once sketched our logo on napkins. He arrived 10 minutes late, hair swept back to hide dark circles. He sat, laid his phone face down as if marking an escape hatch. I pushed the folder toward him lightly. No big speech. He flipped, read. His jaw tightened. Tiny muscles at his temple twitched. He asked without raising his voice, "What are you doing, Mom?" "Saving the company," I answered, equally calm. He looked at me. For the first time in months, our eyes met without sliding off. "She's my mother," he said. "I'm your mother," I said. The space between the two mothers quivered like a string just tuned. He said nothing, tucked the file under his arm, stood up. "I need to verify." I nodded. "You need time." He nodded. I didn't hug him. We didn't hug in that cafe where we had shared so many small embraces when he was 10. But when he left, I realized my feet were steadier. That evening, Damon called, sad at first, steady after. "I'm sorry," he said. "I was weak." I looked out the window at apartment windows blinking like Morse code in a sleepless city. "You're not weak," I said. "You chose." Silence on the line for a few seconds. Then he asked, "Mata, is there any way back?" "I choose freedom," I said. The word freedom left my lips like a bird that had stood too long on the windowsill finally taking flight. I didn't know where it would go. I slept little that night, but by morning I felt I'd crossed a bridge without looking down. Weeks later, everything sped up as if someone had hit fast forward. The supervisory board called an extraordinary meeting. Contracts were halted. Maya was required to explain. Her email defenses slid like oil on water. Danta came to my house on a night of heavy rain, stood at the door with wet shoulders and said, "I'm sorry." That simple sentence opened my heart like a cramped room where someone had finally drawn the curtain. He said he would press charges if evidence was sufficient. I said, "Don't do it for me. Do it for the company." He nodded, and this time we hugged. No more words, listening to rain on the roof like drums beating the overture to another play. When I closed the door, I leaned against the wood, tracing the grain as if touching the history of a tree that had stood through storms. I knew that from the moment the ceremony unlocked that secret, I had stepped into the rest of my life apart, without common wall photos, without dinners cooked for more than one, without a familiar key in the lock, but with a different rhythm, deep, slow, with the smell of hot tea and butter melting in a morning pan, with the sound of pen on paper, and with a woman in the mirror who no longer asked why, only said quietly, "Continue." I began with the smallest things needing no one's approval: waking earlier, eating breakfast more slowly, cleaning old files, gathering all the invoices that had once saved us from bankruptcy into a single box labeled "The Early Days," as if reminding myself there was a version of me who knew how to live without anyone's validation. Among those papers I found a photo of 8-year-old Danta in school uniform, holding a cookie I had baked the night before with so much butter my hands ached. He grinned, a chip in his front tooth like a comma in the sentence of life. I realized the thing saving me now was small details, pieces that, when assembled, made a picture no longer just of betrayal and courtrooms, but of life with the smell of flour, rain, fresh paper. The auditor sent another draft. Cash flows surfaced like underground rivers in flood. Culture trainings without participant lists, speaker fees with no lectures, strategic recruitment costs paid to a shell company with only a mailbox address. I skimmed the numbers, heard them tell a story in a language that needed no sound, and gradually saw the shape of a backstage hand, oiling the right hinges to open double-locked doors. I printed, banded, put them in a hard folder, and walked to the office of the female attorney the auditor recommended, a woman with steel needle eyes and a voice low enough to steady the trembling. She listened almost an hour without interrupting, taking notes in small, straight letters. When I paused for thirst, she handed me water. Keep talking. Don't worry about saying too much. Here, surplus is better than lack. That simple line unlocked something in my chest. I spoke more, about nights the line stopped for lack of parts, how I borrowed screws from a neighbor plant, how I paid workers with hot noodles when pay was late, all the things that made me believe injustice must be corrected, not for honor but for tomorrow's bread. She nodded, fingers steepled. We'll petition for asset preservation and a temporary injunction to halt opaque disbursements. We'll cross-reference each contract with outputs. If there's no output, that's a dark patch. If there is output but no traceable beneficiary, that's a shadow. If both are empty, that's a void that still drains the bank. In her eyes there was no hatred, only discipline. I knew I'd chosen the right person to stand beside me in court. Near midnight, Danta texted a screenshot and email suspending Maya's approval authority. I signed, he wrote, then 3 small words, sorry mom. I placed the phone warm side down on my chest, closed my eyes, and for the first time in weeks slept deeply, like sinking into water. Morning came. Internal communications at the company erupted like a startled flock. Questions about restructuring, raising control standards, internal investigations. I skimmed and closed it. I no longer did PR for anyone. I was speaking to truth and the court. The preliminary hearing took place in a wood-paneled room the color of honey. The judge, a short-haired, silver-haired woman, had the calmest eyes like a lake unruffled by wind. Our side was concise, appendices thick, comparison tables projected, arrows linking transfer dates to board meetings, personal emails to shell accounts, HR minutes to training invoices. I didn't look at Maya. I feared my eyes might reflect something I didn't want, bitter pity for someone who dug her own hole and fell in. When it was my turn, I stood straight as I had in the cold room inspecting stock, and slowly explained how a wrong HR decision could fisher everything from steamer to customer's table. I described the smell of expired goods, cold, not pungent, but scraping the throat like paper. I said why we had sworn never to compromise and why today's numbers were not just money but a bent oath. The judge asked a few short questions. Maya's attorney tried to paint common practice and delegated authority, but when the judge asked where are the outputs, they stumbled. The injunction was granted. Several accounts were frozen. The press began to sniff and email for comment. I did not answer. I drove home on a sun-dappled road, light tapping my eyelids like a private message from the sky: stand outside the crowd and do your work. That afternoon, Damon appeared at my door. White shirt, sleeves rolled. The look of a man who had put out many fires, except this one he had lit. We sat at the small table that had seen sparse Christmases. He bowed his head, said, "I'm sorry," not once but 3 times, as if each time opened another lock. He confessed he'd known the truth about Danta before I did, that Maya's condition, don't tell, was a leash, that he feared I'd leave, feared the company would collapse if I left, so he retreated, choosing silence to keep what words could not. I listened and realized his fear was not of losing me, but of losing a convenient structure where he was center and I was traction, and I understood something painfully simple: some people love us in ways that make us slowly disappear. I poured tea, set the cup before him. "We've crossed the bridge," I said. He nodded, eyes moist. For the first time in years, he didn't try to phrase anything beyond tiredness, and I thanked heaven for that tiredness because it was real. The trial date arrived like a torn calendar page. No rain, no blaze, just enough wind to stir the flags outside the courthouse. I wore a deep blue dress, flats, little jewelry. I wanted my body light as paper so memory and words could carry the weight. The courtroom was fuller than the preliminary. Press in the back, recorders like little beetles. Maya entered, gray suit, hair high, face taut with forced composure. I glanced and recognized that she might once have been a child who wanted to be chosen, to be called, to have a seat at a crowded table. Strangely, my anger cooled like oil lifted off flame. Not instant forgiveness, but a refusal to carry her on my shoulders any longer. Witnesses testified: a warehouse foreman about receive first, paperwork later, a buyer about the pressure for cheap at all costs, a driver about swapping labels. Each account fell like stones into a pond, rippling circles. My attorney presented chains of transfers that meshed like gears. Maya's attorney produced a few invoices too clean, so clean they lacked the dust of reality. The judge asked about that dust. They couldn't provide it. When my turn came, I didn't speak about marriage or betrayal. I spoke about the core credo of a food company: if it's not good enough for your child's plate, don't sell it. I repeated Damon's line from the beginning and saw him bow his head in the back row. A circle closed in the most civilized way without smashing. The judge read the ruling late afternoon, her voice a blade cutting a tangled rope: repayment of illegal disbursements with interest, termination of employment status, partial referral to the Economic Crimes Unit. The court acknowledged the new board's cooperation and required a remediation plan to protect workers. I sat still, inhaled through my nose, exhaled through my mouth, felt my body receiving the news like a field receiving rain after drought. No cheering, only soaking in. Outside, questions fluttered like birds. Do you have anything to say? Do you regret anything? I said only, truth needs fewer words than lies, and walked through the crowd like between two breezes, went home, turned on the kitchen light, washed 2 cups, set them on the shelf like 2 small milestones. In the weeks that followed, the company recovered part of the money, renewed contracts with old vendors, cut invisible culture costs. Danta announced he would step back from executive titles for 6 months to go to the plants, learn the lines again, how the smell of flour changes with humidity, how to ask workers, "What's wrong today that I haven't noticed?" I smiled, thinking it was the most expensive and most worthy course of his life. Damon sold his sports car, moved into a smaller apartment, sent me an envelope with a note: "Thank you for not burning it down." I read it, placed it in a drawer, feeling as calm as folding dry laundry. I opened a small bakery on a street corner, hung a hand-carved sign: "Pan y verdet bread and truth." Each morning butter melted. Yeast rose like small laughter inside dough. Customers called me by name. I reminded each to drink water. I asked children whether they preferred crisp crusts or soft crumbs. I used less sugar for the elderly. I found a rhythm I had dropped for years while chasing the drum of an empire. One afternoon, Danta brought fresh herbs from a restructured greenhouse. He told me about an old foreman who cried when the line stopped accepting poor quality goods. "Thanks for giving us our backs again." I placed my hand on my son's shoulder, thankful he brought not just herbs but a believable story. We didn't mention Maya. No need, the court had spoken, the law had spoken, and time would say the rest. I did not nurture gloating. I wanted to nurture dough and a compassion measured enough not to become weakness. Another evening I sat on the bakery steps, watching passers-by: an old woman walking a dog, a couple arguing in whispers, a girl in a red cap hugging a comically large loaf with small arms. The sky dulled to indigo. The air smelled of rain. I thought of the words that had pinned me down: infertility, betrayal, divorce, investigation. Now they were merely travelers I'd passed. The word I kept for myself was choose. My phone buzzed. Damon sent a photo of a pot of tomato soup. "I cooked it myself," he wrote. I replied, "Good. Nothing more, nothing less." I didn't open any door, but I didn't slam one either. I let the wind pass through my house like through a garden with a just right fence. When the streetlights blinked on, I locked the bakery, went to the back kitchen, sat, opened the old notebook where I'd drawn the first boxes, and added one line: "Continue, but lightly." Ink seeped into paper like water into soil. Not hurried, not retreating, just on time. I understood freedom isn't being tied to nothing, but being tied to what you choose with steady hands. I turned off the light, stepped onto the porch, listened to wind chimes clink. High above, the clouds parted. A few stars switched on like stove lights, and I smiled to myself. Not the smile of a winner, but of someone who finished the right work, put the right things in the right places, light shoulders, warm hands, ready for another batch in the morning. The days that followed moved to the rhythm of baking bread, of steam, of the doorbell chiming when someone entered. I grew used to the small sounds of a new life: the knife cutting crust, glasses clinking lightly on the counter, someone calling, "Mata, one more loaf please." I no longer thought of boardrooms, speeches, numbers. only of faces that drifted through this bakery, strangers who accidentally became markers of time. Each time the oven chimed ting, I remembered a chapter closing, as if the sound carried both farewell and greeting. Danta still stopped by weekly with small stories from the company, not big ones but small things that made me believe he was living truthfully. A young employee volunteering overtime, an old line repaired by workers' ingenuity, reports that no longer lied. I listened without comment, just smiled, knowing my son had finally chosen the right direction. Not power but dignity. Some evenings after closing I wrote, not a diary, but short pieces about moments when people fell silent before a fragrant loaf, or how morning light slid through flour dust. I sent them to a local magazine, not expecting publication, but strangely they printed one, then another. One day a young editor called, "Could you tell me more about what it feels like to start over?" I was quiet a moment, then answered, "Like turning on a light in an old room, not because you fear the dark but to see the dust." She laughed, a young clear laugh like crystal bells. I realized I no longer feared time. I walked every early morning, past the park where people exercised, breathing deep the scent of trees, bread, and coffee from the corner shop. Everything was ordinary enough to be miraculous. Sometimes I spotted Damon at a distance, quietly watching, not approaching. We were no longer husband and wife, but his presence didn't unnerve me. It was a former shadow that no longer scared anyone, because I was now the one who turned on the light. One morning he approached holding a paper. His transfer of the rest of his company shares to Danta. "I owe you this," he said. I didn't say thank you, only nodded. He asked, "Do you ever regret it?" I looked at him, a smile coming as softly as breath. "No. If I had to go through everything to get to today, every wound was worth it." He nodded and left. I stood listening to his car fade away, calm as a windless lake. That afternoon, Danta brought my grandchild, a clear-eyed child with inky black hair. The little one ran around the store shouting, "Grandma, I'll help." I laughed, my heart loosening like an oven door just opened. I placed a hand on my son's shoulder. No words were needed, everything was in our eyes. Life doesn't go back, but it can bloom again. And I, the one who once lost everything, now know that if I still have these hands and a heart still warm, I can knead dough, can love, can live many more times, each time more rightly. I turned 70 on an autumn morning smelling of ripe apples and the scratch of dry leaves under passing shoes. I opened the bakery as I had for 20 years. Yeast still rose, butter still melted, dough was still smooth under hands speckled with sesame-like brown spots. When people asked my secret for standing through many seasons, I pointed at the clock: right time, right heat, right heart. When I was young I didn't understand right heart. I thought following the procedure was enough. But life taught me that with the same recipe, people bake different loaves because the hands carry their owner's story, and that story perfuses the final aroma. My stories now are no longer sharp like indictments, they're round and ripe like late fruit, sweet enough to invite, tart enough to remember. I still walk through the park before firing the oven, stopping beneath the old maple to hear sparrows argue over a low branch, remembering a very old day when I stood under another eave and told myself, "Continue." That line follows me like a small pin at a hem, unseen but keeping the fold straight. If someone asks me to recount every event, I shake my head. Time has done that already. Time rinses wounds. Lessons we must write ourselves. I learned pain has no schedule. It comes like a slanted rain, wets your coat, leaves and leaves behind a porch and the smell of new earth. I learned truth has fewer words than lies. Thus it is quieter, slower, requiring patience to see. I learned forgiveness is an erased memory, but memory sorted into the right drawer, so when you open the cabinet it doesn't fall on your head. I won't promise anyone every story ends well. I only know that even the loosest endings can lead us back to a warm kitchen if we're willing to relearn how to light the fire. Danta now has gray dusting his temples. Each time he pushes through the door and the bell rings, I glance back and always see the first blink of the baby I once carried. He has taken a long detour to understand a simple truth: leadership isn't standing higher, it's bowing at the right moment. He teaches his team to smell the flour, to listen to the line, to ask, "Is there anything wrong I haven't seen?" That question has saved them more often than speeches. Sometimes he brings my grandchild. The child likes to sit on the wooden stool at the counter, legs swinging, drawing smiley faces in dry flour, asking why the dough feels like clouds. Because it trusts our hands, I say. The answer makes the child laugh, and I realize it's also the answer for human life, soften not from weakness, but to rise. Damon has become a quiet man in an apartment overlooking the harbor. Some years he sends a birthday card for the bakery. His handwriting leans a little, like a person standing straight who still remembers waves. We have nothing to say beyond gratitude that we both put heavy things down. I no longer resent him, just as you can't resent a rainy season that passed and left the tree tougher. Maya left the city long ago. I heard she works in social services somewhere else, helping young women who slipped through cracks like the one she once did. The news came like a thin breeze. I closed my eyes and wished for everyone to find a room with a window facing the right way. At this age, I understand we aren't the sum of our mistakes, nor a list of achievements. We are how we treat others when we're most tired, the sentence we swallow when it could hurt someone, the loaf we bake for a stranger without waiting for thanks. The bakery has fed me as I fed it. Each day is a lesson in fire too low and the dough stays raw. Too high and it burns, just right and it becomes a soft crumb with a crisp crust. Some mornings the yeast won't rise though it's proofed long enough. I open the window, add a pinch more patience, and the miracle happens. Time does what haste cannot. I wish I'd learned that sooner, but had I might not be the woman standing here. Young people sometimes drop by and ask what to do when everything falls apart. I pour tea and smile, count what's still in your hands, time, breath, one trustworthy friend, one small skill, and a sunny corner of a room. Start with the smallest thing you can do today. By night, you'll have another brick. They say it's too ordinary. I nod, bread is ordinary, yet it feeds a whole city. They laugh, snap photos of me in the oven and leave. I watch them disappear at the bend, feeling I've passed a small spark to someone. Not knowing if it will burn but believing it will warm. On a kitchen shelf I keep small artifacts of my life, the teardrop earring I wore on the stormy day, my frayed employee badge, Danta at 8, the note, thank you for not burning it down, and a scrap that reads, continue but lightly. Each time I pause, I touch them, taking attendance of the selves who have passed through this body. They are different, but each tried as best she knew at the time. I forgive them as I forgive failed batches. Learn, keep the recipe, don't scold the dough. I've attended a few weddings at this age, standing in the back, listening to vows that always include trust. I want to tell them trust isn't neglect. It's supervising without controlling, assigning without robbing the chance to fix mistakes. I want to say to those about to begin a union, don't marry out of fear of loneliness. Don't build a house on the need to prove yourself. Build with kindness you can repeat day after day. And if one day you must leave, leave with thank you, because anger leaves more ash than flame. Last winter, the season's first snow dusted the bakery's sill, rare for this city. I watched white flakes shatter on glass like sprinkled salt and instinctively lit the oven, baking extra loaves to share with passersby. Everyone said thank you. Some just nodded and walked on. Suddenly I felt a thin thread connecting me to all, a quiet sweetness. When I closed that night, I wrote, you don't always need a crowd to know you're doing the right thing. It took years to say my name without trembling. Mata. I have been a wife, a mother, a partner, a plaintiff, a witness, a baker. I have been a figure in someone else's shadow, and the person who switched on her own light. I no longer want to strike out any title. I see them as layers of starter, each gave me flavor. If I leave anything behind, it won't be a sensational tale of a fall and revenge, but a short recipe. Keep the heat even, stir slowly, taste with your heart, give someone else the first slice, let tomorrow have the rest. When night comes, I draw the curtains, hear the wind chimes touch, and think of faces passing through my life like fruit season. Some arrive on time, some fail without warning, some seem gone then suddenly hang heavy again. I rest my palm on the wooden counter, and gratitude rises like a gentle wave. If I wake tomorrow, I'll need again. If one day I haven't the strength, I'll teach someone else to need. And if no one needs to learn, I'll sit on the porch, watch the sky change, and thank life for letting me rise many times with these very hands. I once believed happiness was a locked house. Now I know it is an open window. Yeast still rises when given enough time, and so do hearts. I am 70 and I am at peace.